The boat engine sputtered to silence, leaving me with the sound of waves and a sinking feeling of regret. A whole month on this tiny island? What had I gotten myself into? My agent's voice echoed in my head. No distractions, no excuses. Deliver the manuscript or don't come back. Easy for him to say. He wasn't about to spend 30 days communing with crabs and seagulls. The cabin looked like it hadn't seen a human inhabitant in decades. It smelled like mildew and regret. I dumped my bag on the sagging couch and tried to convince myself that solitude would ignite my creativity. Just as I started unpacking, I noticed a trail of wet footprints leading from the door to the kitchen. My heart kicked into overdrive. A squatter? On my deserted island? Armed with the sharpest butter knife I could find, I followed the trail. The kitchen was empty, but the back door hung open. Stepping onto the porch, I froze. There, sitting cross-legged in the sand, was a woman, or something that looked like one. Her skin shimmered like mother of pearl, catching the sunlight in a way that screamed not human. She was stark naked, holding what looked suspiciously like my manuscript pages. "Excuse me, what the hell are you doing?" I demanded. She turned her head lazily, as if I were the intruder here. Her eyes were a swirling mix of silver and blue, and her expression was the universal language of annoyed. "Your Earth symbols are useless," she said, waving a crumpled page. Her voice was rich, laced with an accent I couldn't place. "No logical structure, no coherent thought. Do all your kind communicate like this?" What?" My brain short-circuited. "That's my book. This is literature?" She snorted, balling up the page. "No wonder your species is considered primitive." "Primitive? Lady, you're the one naked on my island, critiquing my work." Her gaze flicked over me, unimpressed. "You're overdressed. Is all that fabric necessary for survival, or are you compensating for something? Okay, you know what? I don't care where you're from or why you're here. Just stop using my manuscript as toilet paper." She raised an eyebrow, then stood. I immediately regretted my outburst. She was taller than I expected, and her whole aura screamed otherworldly. She took a step closer, and I instinctively stepped back, tripping over a rock and landing flat on my ass. "Relax, Earthling," she said, smirking. "I'm not here to harm you. I was left behind. Social experiment, they said. Study the locals, they said. Thought I'd end up somewhere interesting, not this." She gestured dramatically at the empty horizon. "You're an alien?" I asked, still trying to process her words. "Obviously. Unless humans suddenly evolved bioluminescent skin while I wasn't looking." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Okay, let me get this straight. You're an alien, stranded on Earth, and now you're crashing at my cabin? Your domicile is a pathetic structure, but it will suffice. This isn't a charity. You can't just waltz in and—" "You think I want to be here?" she interrupted. "Your species barely qualifies as sentient. My superiors dropped me here to observe your customs, but frankly I'm unimpressed. So far, I've learned humans are loud, disorganized, and obsessed with ridiculous rituals like covering their bodies. Listen, miss. Call me Ziana," she said, folding her arms. "Ziana, you can't stay here. I came to this island to work. I'm a writer. I need peace and quiet." "A writer?" She tilted her head, genuinely intrigued for the first time. "A recorder of thoughts and experiences. Fascinating. Though judging by your manuscript, I'd say your species has a long way to go in the arts." I groaned. "Why are you even reading it?" "It was lying around, and I was curious. Besides, there's nothing else to do on this boring rock." "Well, you're not staying here. Find your own rock." Her smirk widened. "What will you do, Earthling? Fight me?" I opened my mouth to retort, but nothing came out. What could I do? She looked like she could break me in half with one hand. Instead, I muttered, "Just stay out of my way." "Gladly," she said, striding past me into the cabin. "But you might want to fix your bathroom. I thought it was some sort of shrine." Imagine my disappointment. I stared after her, wondering if I'd finally lost my mind. Then I heard her voice from inside the cabin. And don't worry, I left your sacred texts intact. Mostly. The next morning, I woke to the distinct sound of something, or someone, rummaging through the kitchen. Groaning, I rolled out of bed, half expecting to find a raccoon making itself at home. Instead, I was greeted by Ziana, now wearing one of my shirts. She tied it at the waist like some alien fashionista, though it barely covered anything below that point. "Good morning, Earthling," she said cheerily, holding a frying pan in one hand and an entire carton of eggs in the other. "Your food supply is atrocious, but I've decided to make do." "What are you doing?" I asked, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Experimenting," she said, cracking an egg with one hand. The contents splattered all over the counter. She frowned at it. "Your species eats these, yes? What part of the animal is this? Internal organ? Offspring? It's a chicken egg. People eat them cooked, not raw. What are you even trying to do? Assimilate, obviously. If I'm stuck on this miserable rock, I might as well learn your customs. How else am I supposed to endure your bizarre rituals?" She gestured dramatically to the egg mess, clearly expecting applause for her effort. I sighed and stepped in. "Okay, first of all, let me show you how to cook an egg. Second, you can't just take my clothes, my food, or my everything. Can't I?" She leaned against the counter, her smirk making it clear she had no intention of listening to me. "You're awfully territorial for someone who claims to value hospitality. Isn't that one of your species' virtues? That's not. Look, there are rules, okay? And you're breaking all of them." Her silver blue eyes sparkled with amusement. "Rules are subjective. On my planet, it's considered polite to challenge someone's authority when they're being unreasonable." "You think I'm unreasonable?" I spluttered. "You're the one yelling before breakfast," she pointed out, taking a bite of an uncooked egg like it was an apple. I nearly gagged. "You're impossible. And you're uptight. Maybe we balance each other out." She said it so casually, as if it were the most logical conclusion in the universe. I couldn't tell if she was serious or just messing with me. Probably both. After an awkward, mostly silent breakfast, during which Ziana critiqued my coffee-making skills and attempted to eat toast with a fork, I decided to lay down some ground rules. "Look," I said, leaning against the kitchen table. "If we're going to coexist, we need boundaries. For starters, no wandering around naked. Wear clothes, proper ones. Your obsession with covering the body is fascinating," she mused. "Is it shame? Modesty? Or are you just cold?" "It's called decency," I snapped. "Second, don't mess with my stuff. That means my writing, my clothes, my food, everything. Got it?" "Define mess with," she said, her tone dripping with mock innocence. I groaned. "Just don't touch anything without asking, okay?" "Fine," she said, clearly humoring me. "But in return, I have a rule for you." I blinked. "A rule? For me?" "Yes." "Stop being so boring." "Boring? You're on an island with an alien," she said, gesturing at herself. "Instead of marveling at my superior existence, you're sulking like a child. Where's your sense of adventure?" "Adventure doesn't pay the bills," I muttered. "Neither does being dull," she countered. Before I could argue, she stood, her bioluminescent skin glowing faintly in the sunlight streaming through the window. "I'm going for a swim. Don't wait up." "Wait, you can't just..." But she was already out the door. I stared after her, torn between exasperation and fascination. How had my life spiraled into this madness? I spent the next few hours trying to write, but every time I focused on my laptop, my thoughts drifted to Ziana. Her biting sarcasm, her effortless confidence, the way she seemed to glow in every sense of the word. Shaking my head, I forced myself back to work. But then I heard a loud crash from outside. Running out of the cabin, I found Ziana standing over a fallen tree, her hands on her hips. She glanced at me and said, "Relax. It was in the way." In the way of what? I demanded. My view, she said, as if it were obvious. Do you have any idea how much work it takes to chop down a tree like that? Clearly not enough, she said, brushing wood chips off her borrowed shirt. I stared at her, dumbfounded. This was my life now. Later that evening, I decided I needed a break from Ziana's chaotic presence. Grabbing a flashlight, I headed down to the beach to clear my head. The moonlight cast a silvery glow on the water, and for the first time in days, I felt a moment of peace. That was, of course, until I heard her voice behind me. Contemplating your existence, Earthling? She asked, appearing out of the shadows like some celestial specter. Do you ever give me a moment to myself? I sighed. Not when you're being boring, she said with a smirk. What are you doing out here anyway? Stargazing? Plotting your next mundane chapter? I'm thinking, I replied curtly. About? Life. Bills. Writing. You know, normal human stuff. She sat down on a nearby rock, her silvery blue hair shimmering under the moonlight. Your species is obsessed with overcomplicating everything. Life doesn't have to be so heavy, you know. Easy for you to say, I muttered. You're not the one stuck trying to make ends meet. No, I'm the one stranded on a primitive planet with a species that thinks Wi-Fi is advanced technology. She quipped. Hey, watch it. I shot back, unable to suppress a small grin. There was a pause, the sound of waves filling the silence. Then she asked, Why do you write? I mean, what's the point? The question caught me off guard. I guess. I write because it's the only way I know how to make sense of the world. To connect with people. Her eyes softened slightly. So, it's your way of shouting into the void and hoping someone hears you? Pretty much. Fascinating, she murmured. Your species' need for connection is both endearing and exhausting. Don't tell me your species doesn't crave connection, I challenged. We don't crave anything. We operate on logic, efficiency, and necessity, she said, her tone almost defensive. That's sad, I said without thinking. She raised an eyebrow. Sad? Yeah. What's the point of living if you don't feel anything? Love, anger, joy, even frustration? Her expression faltered for a moment, as if I'd hit a nerve. Then she recovered, smirking. Well, if emotions are so great, how come you're miserable half the time? Touché, I admitted. For a while, we just sat there, staring at the ocean. It was oddly peaceful, like a truce in our ongoing battle of wits. Then, as if she couldn't resist, she said, By the way, I tried your alcohol earlier. Weak stuff. You drank my whiskey? It tasted like fuel, she said with a grimace. I don't know how your kind drinks it voluntarily. Great. Add draining my liquor cabinet to the list of your crimes, I said, shaking my head. Relax. I left you some. How generous, I muttered. She laughed, and for the first time, it wasn't mocking or sarcastic. It was genuine, and it caught me off guard. For a brief moment, I saw a different side of her, less guarded, almost human. Tell you what, she said, standing up. Since you're such a delicate creature, I'll try to respect your boundaries. But only if you lighten up a little. Lighten up? I asked. Yeah. Smile. Laugh. Do something other than scowl at me all day. I couldn't help but chuckle. Fine. Deal. Good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to see if your shower works properly. Your bathing rituals are absurdly complicated. As she walked away, I realized I didn't feel as annoyed as I usually did. Maybe her chaos was starting to grow on me, or maybe I was just losing my mind. Either way, life on this island was never going to be the same. The following morning, I woke to the smell of something burning. Panic gripped me as I bolted out of bed and stumbled into the kitchen. What the hell are you doing? I shouted, staring at Ziana, who stood over the stove with a frying pan in one hand and a spatula in the other. Cooking breakfast, she said casually, as if she hadn't just set off every smoke detector in the cabin. I pointed at the charred remains of what might have once been eggs. That's not breakfast, that's a crime scene. Earthling food is unnecessarily fragile, she said, glaring at the frying pan. How do you people survive when your sustenance is this delicate? By not incinerating it, I snapped, grabbing the pan from her and tossing the blackened mess into the sink. Ungrateful, she muttered, crossing her arms. I was trying to be helpful. Helpful? You almost burned the place down. She rolled her eyes. Drama queen. It was perfectly under control. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Why were you even cooking in the first place? Because you're useless at feeding yourself. I've seen you eat nothing but instant noodles and canned soup for days. Do you want to die of malnutrition? That's rich coming from someone who can't even scramble eggs, I retorted. She smirked. At least I'm trying. Unlike you, mister, I'll just survive on sodium and regret. Fine. Lesson 1, stay away from the stove, I said firmly. And lesson 2? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Don't touch my kitchen again. She laughed, a mischievous glint in her eye. We'll see. After the kitchen disaster was dealt with, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. Naturally, Ziana insisted on tagging along. This is what you do for fun? She asked, her tone dripping with skepticism as we strolled along the island's rocky shore. It's relaxing, I replied. It's boring, she shot back. Not everything has to be exciting, I said. Sometimes it's nice to just exist. She gave me a look. Spoken like someone who's never lived a day in his life. Excuse me? You heard me. You're stuck in your little bubble, too scared to step outside of it. No wonder your writing's uninspired. Her words stung, but I tried not to show it. And what would you know about living? I countered. More than you think, she said, her voice unusually soft. For a moment, there was an unexpected vulnerability in her eyes. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by her usual smirk. I'm just saying, maybe you should try something new for once, she added. Like what? I asked, half expecting her to suggest something ridiculous. Skinny dipping, for starters, she said with a wicked grin. I choked on my own breath. What? No. Why not? She teased. Afraid of a little freedom? I'm afraid of hypothermia, I shot back. Excuses, excuses, she said, shaking her head. Not everyone's as shameless as you, I muttered. She laughed. Shame is a human construct. It's pointless. Yeah, well, some of us like our pointless constructs, I said. Suit yourself, she said with a shrug, wading into the water fully clothed. What are you doing now? I asked, exasperated. Living, she replied simply. I watched as she swam out into the ocean, her movements graceful and unrestrained. Despite myself, I couldn't help but admire her. For all her chaos and sass, there was something undeniably captivating about her. When she finally returned, dripping wet and grinning, she said, See? Was that so hard to watch? You're insane, I said, shaking my head. Maybe, she said, wringing out her hair. But at least I'm having fun. Can you say the same? I didn't answer. Partly because I didn't know how, and partly because she had a point. The days on the island started to blur together. Between the arguments, the accidental near catastrophes, and the odd moments of unexpected connection, I was losing track of time. Ziana seemed determined to make every single day a new adventure, no matter how chaotic it was. One morning, she greeted me by tossing a strange, glimmering rock into my lap. What the hell is this? I asked, staring at the rock, which looked like it had been forged from pure stardust. I found it by the cliffs. It's a gift, she said with a playful wink. A gift? I said, raising an eyebrow. Are you trying to bribe me now? No, it's a sign of respect, she said, sounding strangely serious. On my planet, we give gifts to show that we value someone's company. I stared at her, unsure of whether she was joking or not. You're giving me a rock because I'm good company? Well, yeah, she said, crossing her arms, obviously pleased with herself. I shook my head in disbelief. You really know how to make a guy feel special. Don't get cocky, Earthling, she said, rolling her eyes. I don't do this for everyone. You're just a curiosity. A challenge. That was, of course, when I realized that she wasn't just making fun of me, she was actually paying attention to me. After that, things shifted between us. There was still the constant bickering, the sarcastic comments, the teasing. But now, there was something else too. I caught myself watching her a little too long when she wasn't looking. Her laughter became more contagious. And, much to my surprise, I found myself enjoying her company more than I had any right to. On the fourth day of this strange shift, we were sitting on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunset in silence. She had her feet propped up on the railing, her eyes narrowed at the horizon as if trying to decipher the world. I wasn't sure what to make of her expression, but there was something in it that seemed almost wistful. So, what's the deal with you in relationships? I asked, trying to break the tension. She glanced at me, eyebrow raised. What do you mean? You know, I said, fumbling. Like love, sex, all that human stuff you seem to have so many opinions about. Ah, she said, her voice suddenly cold. The complicated stuff. Yeah. You're all logic this, efficiency that. How do you even begin to feel those things? She turned to look at me fully, eyes intense. Feelings are just distractions, Earthling. They cloud judgment. You'll never reach your true potential if you're consumed by them. Sounds miserable, I said with a scoff. Maybe. But that's how we were raised. I mean, I get it, I said, leaning back. But maybe your people are just avoiding what's hard. Love, relationships, they're messy. But they're also real. She was silent for a long time. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but it wasn't this sudden quiet intensity. Finally, she spoke. Not everyone sees love the way you do, she said softly. For us, love was an experiment. A social construct we left behind a long time ago. Yeah, well, maybe it's not so bad after all, I muttered. She looked at me then, an unreadable expression on her face. Maybe. But what if I told you that love isn't as simple as your kind makes it out to be? What if it's just a weakness? I shook my head. Love's a lot of things, but weakness isn't one of them. I thought she was going to say something more, but instead, she stood up abruptly and went inside, leaving me to wrestle with the confusion she just dropped on me. It was then that I realized something I'd been avoiding. I didn't just like having her around. I was starting to feel something deeper. But the idea of falling for someone like Ziana, someone so alien, was terrifying. I spent the rest of the day trying to push those thoughts out of my mind, but every time she'd flash me that smile, or offer a sarcastic quip, my heart would skip a beat. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't deny it anymore. I was falling for her. I didn't know how to handle the mess of emotions swirling inside me. Ziana and I had been living in this bizarre limbo, where every moment seemed to teeter between anger, amusement, and something more, something deeper. But admitting it? Admitting that I might actually be falling for a sassy, sarcastic alien woman who couldn't even cook a decent meal? That was a whole different kind of insanity. She was sitting on the porch again, a slight breeze tousling her wet hair from her earlier swim. The sunset was casting a warm orange glow over everything, making the scene almost romantic in spite of everything. I took a deep breath and walked over to her. Hey, I said, my voice sounding more strained than I intended. She looked up at me, a playful glint in her eyes. What, no sarcastic comments today? I hesitated, then sat down beside her, keeping some distance. I think I'm starting to get it. Get what? She asked, sounding genuinely curious now. Love. Relationships. Why it's worth it, even if it's messy and complicated. She raised an eyebrow. You've been listening to too many rom-coms, Earthling. Don't let them fool you. I'm serious, I said, my voice more determined. I've been fighting it, but the truth is, I can't stop thinking about you. It's ridiculous, and I don't know how to process it, but it's there. I'm just confused. Ziana went quiet for a moment, and I wasn't sure if I had crossed some invisible line or if she was actually thinking about what I'd said. Finally, she spoke. So, you want to be in a relationship with me? I froze. Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't expect you to just be okay with it. She laughed, leaning back in her chair. You're right. This is crazy. I've been trying to avoid these kinds of feelings for so long. And here you are, making it complicated. I didn't mean to, I muttered. But I don't know. Maybe this is just how it is when you're with someone who challenges everything you thought you knew. She looked at me, a hint of softness in her gaze. I never thought I'd meet someone like you. Someone who doesn't see me as a project or some alien to be studied. You don't even know what to make of me, but you're still here. That means something. I couldn't help but chuckle. And here I thought I was the one being challenged the most. I think we're both a mess in different ways, she said with a smirk. Well, at least we've got that in common, I said, feeling a little lighter. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. And you think this is enough to build something real? A relationship? I looked down at my hands, feeling the weight of the question. I don't know, Ziana. I really don't. But I know I'm not going to find out if I keep running from it. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore filling the space between us. So what now? I finally asked. Now? She grinned. Now we figure this out. No more running. But don't expect me to go easy on you. Wouldn't have it any other way, I said, smiling despite the chaos of my thoughts. And just like that, something shifted between us. The distance that had been there for so long, the uncertainty, the tension, began to dissipate. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't clear, but it was something real. I wasn't sure what the future held for us, for me, for her, or for anything on this island. But I knew one thing for certain: this strange, absurd, impossible situation had become something I wasn't willing to let go of. Ziana had taught me more about myself in these few days than I ever thought possible. And as crazy as it seemed, I was ready to step into whatever came next, side by side with her. I looked over at her, seeing the glint in her eyes that told me she was still as unpredictable and enigmatic as ever. Don't make me regret this, I said, feeling more than a little vulnerable. She smirked, her usual confidence returning. You'd better hold on tight, Earthling. This is just the beginning. And for the first time since arriving on this island, I wasn't scared of what came next. Whatever it was, it would be worth it.